Today is a episode that I am incredibly excited about because I think it's one of the more important ideas that I'll talk about. Not only on this entire season, but really just in general in life. So, as you can see from the title of the video, we're going to be talking about the Lorax, but more broadly, just trees in general on Earth. This is something that's super important to me. I'm 22 years old, I run a travel blog, and I planted a bunch of trees around where I grew up. And I want to do it everywhere around the country and then eventually everywhere around the world because I think it's the most noble thing that I can do with my time. Where when I have kids in the future, I can explain to them what I tried to do to improve the world that they're living in. And so we're going to be talking about the Lorax, which is a story written by Dr. Seuss in 1971. And I think it's a true story. Basically, you have, the Lorax who speaks for the trees, and that combats against the corporate greed and the effect that that has on nature. So Dr. Seuss has said that this was the most impactful story that he wrote, his personal favorite because of the message that it portrayed. And I think that when we deeply analyze what's going on in our society right now, that he was completely right and that we should very seriously consider what he was trying to say with the idea. So, beyond that, the three elements that are really big in the story, you have the industry, that's the Onceler. And then beyond that, you have the environment, that's the Truffaut trees. And then the activism comes from the Lorax, which is supposed to talk about people who are standing up against the general direction of humanity to say, hold on, we may need to reconsider this if we want our quality of life in the future to be better than it is going to be if we continue to cut down trees all over the world. So I've done an absurd amount of research on trees, and here is what I think will be useful for you to know kind of in the greater context of what I'm talking about. So trees, they are the longest living organism of everything that we have on Earth. So of all the different types of life that we have on Earth, trees see the most amount of time within one lifetime. And so there are trees that are nearly 5,000 years old. Some are supposedly somewhere around 14,000 years old in different places around the world. And they consume about 100 gallons of water a day. And so they have this ability to communicate with each other using underground root systems, which this is something I learned recently and is just beyond, like, it is beyond something that you would be able to look and notice, but is very interesting. So when there is a parasite going around and making the tree's life difficult, they put chemicals in the ground that warn all the other trees in the area, and then the trees release a chemical in the leaves that attracts the predator of whatever the parasite is. So you have a bug, the bug annoys the trees warn all the other trees, and they call in, let's say, a bird that kills that specific type of bug. I find that to be absolutely fascinating because it shows that trees are a lot more sentient than we might give them credit for just by looking at them. And so, over the course of 40 years, a tree will absorb a ton of carbon dioxide, a ton being 2,000 pounds. So, with an entire forest, you can imagine how much of a positive effect that might have on the air that we breathe and how important trees are for the air quality around the world. So, beyond that, I think that it's also very important to kind of consider what we're doing with our forests. You know, what effect are humans having on the environment and forests? So, 100,000 acres of forests are cleared every day. So that comes out to about 15 billion trees cut down every year, and around half of the trees have been deforested by humans. We don't know the exact number because it's 7 trillion, but it's very difficult to keep track of, especially with the rate that we have been cutting them down at. So 27 soccer fields every single minute just gone of trees. So right now we've got about 3 trillion trees, which is 400 per person. And while that might sound like a lot, it's very important to consider the rate at which we're cutting them down. So here is 10 reasons, and this is from my own personal perspective. You're welcome to feel however you want about it, but I think it's very important for me to express these thoughts that I've had after looking into it. So, number one, reasons that humans desperately should look to conserve trees, and how the Lorax is a true story, and there's a lot that we could learn from it. So trees, they improve water quality by kind of slowing rainfall. They filter it as it goes through. 31% of fresh water is drinkable from pollution. And what this means is that less than 1% of the water on Earth we are capable of drinking without it damaging our health. That's the most important reason. That's why I said it first. But these other 9 also carry a lot of weight as well. So there are over 60,000 known species of trees around the world, and they each contribute to their own ecosystem. So more than half of tree species are only found in one country, which is very, very interesting, because that means that there are certain ecosystems that are very, very good environments for specific types of trees to grow. So trees are 420 million years old. And then trees they reduce stress levels, they raise the value of property, and are linked to lower crime rates. People are generally happier around environments with more trees. And so, beyond that, trees encourage rainfall and cooler climates. They prevent flooding, which is very good for property value, obviously, and also makes the insurance game a bit easier. So trees refill aquifers, which is where 97% of our drinking water comes from. Just like we talked about 1% of the water being drinkable, they also play a big role in the water being clean. So forests, they clean the soil. Soil produces the food that we eat. Therefore, the more trees we have, the cleaner our food will be. Beyond that, trees heal people, and 70% of the cancer-fighting plants that we found have been in rainforests, which is why the Amazon is incredibly important to preserve. And the 10th reason, which in my view, probably the second most important behind the quality of our water, is that trees are Earth's most efficient renewable resource. And this is something that I consider greatly, because we can derive a lot of value from trees, but they've not been made a priority by humanity. And so I think what Dr. Seuss was really trying to say with the Lorax is that we need to seriously consider what we want Earth to look like in the future. Do we want it to be a barren wasteland after having gone through all of the resources, after having prioritized resources that we knew we didn't have enough to use as much as we are? Or do we want to plant trees all over the place and have the landscape of Earth fundamentally change? Dr. Seuss is no longer around, but the legacy of the words that he spoke and kind of standing up for forests is something that I find incredibly admirable, and that's why I've made planting trees such a priority in my life. Now, you're free to disagree, but I think me speaking up and saying things like this is very important, so that someone in the future, 50, 100 years from now, can get what I got from Dr. Seuss, willing to kind of stick his neck out there and suggest, hey, we need to very, very seriously consider preserving our forests, because they improve our quality of life.